Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Yang terhormat Rektor Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang pada kesempatan kali ini diwakili oleh Wakil Rektor Bidang Akademik Universitas Negeri Semarang, Profesor Dr. Zainuri SE MSI AKT, yang kami hormati para wakil rektor di lingkungan Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang kami hormati ketua-ketua lembaga di lingkungan Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang kami hormati dekan-dekan di lingkungan Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang kami hormati Dekan Fakultas Ilmu Sosial Universitas Negeri Semarang, Dr. Muhammad Solehatul Mustafa MA, yang kami hormati Wakil Dekan di lingkungan Fakultas Ilmu Sosial Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang kami hormati Ketua Jurusan dan Fungsionaris Jurusan di lingkungan Fakultas Ilmu Sosial Universitas Negeri Semarang, yang kami hormati narasumber kita, Mr. William Bradley Harton, PhD, Associate Professor, Faculty of Education and Human Studies, Akita University, Profesor Hans Pols, Faculty of Science, the University of Sydney, Dr. Suryadi, Faculty of Humanities, Leiden University, Profesor Dr. Wasino M. Hum, Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang, serta peserta konferensi yang turut hadir dalam acara ini. First of all, let's say thanks to our God, the Lord of the world, the Lord of the universe, who has been giving us his blessing and mercy so that we can gather in 6th International Conference on Education and Social Science, or Icess. Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, Berlian Ayu Septiana, as the Master of Ceremony will guide this conference. Before we starting our agenda, let's start this agenda by reading Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Selanjutnya, mendengarkan lagu kebangsaan Indonesia Raya. Hadirin dimohon berdiri. Hadirin dimohon duduk kembali. Next program is greeting from our Semarang State University Rector, yang pada kesempatan kali ini diwakili oleh Wakil Rektor Bidang Akademik UNES kepada Profesor Dr. Zainuri SE MSI Akuntansi. Kami silahkan.
Terima kasih, thank you. I want to committee help me to share screen my PPT application. Okay, thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable Dean Faculty of Social Science, Vice Rector, all of Dean Faculty, Director of Postgraduate, the Head of Research and Community Service, the Head of LP3, Vice Deans, Head of Department of Faculty of Social Science at Universitas Negeri Semarang. Distinguished speakers, next. The first, Professor Hans Puls from University of Sydney, Australia. Welcome to Universitas Negeri Semarang. Selamat datang di kampus Universitas Konservasi. William Bradley Horton Pesty from Akita University, Japan. Welcome to my university. Dr. S. Suryati from University of Leiden, Netherlands. Welcome to my campus, Universitas Negeri Semarang. Profesor Dr. Wasino M. Hum, Universitas Negeri Semarang. All participants. Next, distinguished participants. On behalf of Rector of Universitas Negeri Semarang, I wish to welcome you all to the 6th International Conference of Education and Social Science, Icess. First of all, let's thank Allah SWT for giving blessing and the opportunity for us to meet in this international conference conducted by Faculty of Social Science. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this conference is Digital Technology and Social Science, Humanities and Education. This conference is accordant with UNES vision, UNES to become conservation university with international reputation and spirit to be house of knowledge which develop civilization. The development of digital technology has brought big change in the order of life and even gave birth to a new world civilization. For mankind, digital technology has been integrated into everyday social life. Now, the role of digital technology increasingly dominant when the world faced the spread of the COVID-19 virus. A pandemic situation forced humans and to limit the occurrence of direct social relationship and divert them into mediated relationship through digital. The new world needs to be addressed scientifically, especially from the perspective of social science, humanities, and education, to evaluate and develop social science from the aspect of method, studies, scientific theoretical substance, and good practice in order to find appropriate academic reasoning and facing ongoing change. Topic discussed in international conference include social studies learning in the digital era, social research and digital source, oral tradition, digitalized memory and public history, community, democracy, and policy on the new normal era, digital culture and society, disaster management, environmental problem and conservation, the industrial revolution and social change, global pandemic on social aspects, and humanities learning in the digital era. Next. UNES have a tradition achievement among them. Next. Green Campus. At 2020, 66 international and 6 national. Next. International Certification Assessment Report, SAR, AUNQA, for biology, Indonesian language and literature education, physical education, and development economics. Next, social scopus, more than 1,700. Next, for ICU 2020 rank and stars rating. Next, the best value of budget work field 2020. Next, VTB, 10 years continuously UNES as corruption-free area campus and clean and serving bureaucratic area, integrity zone. Next, SNMPTN, the second rank in Indonesia, the most number of SNMPTN 2021. Student acceptance reached more than 2,700. Student acceptance fourth rank in Indonesia, the most number of SNMPTN enthusiasts reached more than 40,000 applicants. Next, student achievement 2020 at PIMNAS, the rank of 7, and Peximinas, the and Peximinas. Next, milestone UNES 2020 until 2024 to be research university and teaching university. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, the rector of Universitas Negeri Semarang give a motto: the healthy academic atmosphere is built through academic person who has commitment in the three things which are linked each other and mutually reinforcing, namely togetherness, integrity, and real work. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I once again welcome you all to Icess. Finally, with a boom, puncak Himalaya berselimut es, pemandangan alamnya indah niam. Selamat dan sukses pelaksanaan Icess mempererat persaudaraan mengembangkan keilmuan. By saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Icess is officially open. Talk, talk, talk. Thank you for your attention, and we hope you get pleasant experience during this conference. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Professor Dr. Zainuri, SE, MSc, Akuntansi. To our guests and participants, I would like to apologize to our mistaken. I would like to address the welcome speech from our Dean Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang, to Dr. Muhammad Solehatul Mustafa. Time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. The Honorable Rector of Universitas Negeri Semarang, represented by Vice Rector of Academic Affairs, the Honorable Speakers of the 6th International Conference on Education and Social Sciences, Professor Hans Pultz of the University of Sydney, Australia, William Bradley Harton of the Akita University, Japan, Dr. S. Suryadi of the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, Professor Basino of the Universitas Negeri Semarang, the deans from other faculties of Universitas Negeri Semarang, head of unit LP3 and LP2M in Universitas Negeri Semarang, all head of study program in the Faculty of Social Sciences, lecturer in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and the last, we proud most participant of the 6th International Conference of Education and Social Sciences, Icess. First of all, let me give my gratitude to all speakers, participants, and distinguished guests for being able to attend the 6th International Conference on Education and Social Sciences, which has been held for the 6th time. This international conference event will be held online on Friday and Saturday, 9 and 10 April 2021. A total of 400 HT4 participants were registered, consisting of 5 speakers and invited presenting presenter 91 and 300 HTH participants. The participants are lecturers, researchers, and students, S1, S2, and S3 degree, who comes from various universities and research institutions in Indonesia and abroad. The speakers are as follows. Dr. Suryadi has interest in oral tradition and literacy, national and regional literary life in Indonesia. His field research focuses on Sumatra. William Bradley Harton, PhD, is an associate professor of communication studies. Projects are currently connected to Indonesia's Japanese occupation. He also widely known fluent in Bahasa Indonesia. Professor Hans Pohl is interested in the story, sociology, and anthropology of medicine. He currently focuses on the story of colonial and post-colonial medicine in Southeast Asia. The story and sociology of psychiatry hold his particular interest. Professor Dr. Wasino M. Hum, Universitas Negeri Semarang. His research interest in history of business. 6th Icess 2021 is organized by the Faculty of Social Sciences, UNES, and is part of a series of activities for the 56th anniversary of Semarang State University. It's hoped that this conference will become a forum for the publication of research results and innovation in the social field. Besides, it is also a discussion forum for cross-campus lecturers and researchers to become a medium for realizing collaboration. This achievement may not be possible without the hard work of the committee and the support from the big family of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Universitas Negeri Semarang. Therefore, in this occasion, I would like to give appreciation for the community, for the committee and the big family of Faculty of Social Sciences. We know that despite the hard work of committee, there might be some inconvenience on you about this conference. We do apologize and hope you enjoy this conference. Thank you very much for the time. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. So, we are going to next agenda. Selanjutnya yaitu pembacaan doa yang akan disampaikan oleh Saudara Sabit Azinar Ahmad. Kepada beliau, kami silakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Ladies and gentlemen, Let us bow our head for a moment, pray to God Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that our international conference can be precious to all of us. I will lead this prayer based on teaching of Islam, and those who are not Muslim, you are pleased to pray according to your age beliefs. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك العظيم وكريم عظيم سلطانك اللهم إنا نسألك سلامة في ديننا وعافية في جسدنا وزيادة في علمنا وزيادة في علمنا وزيادة في علمنا وبركة في رزقنا وتوبة قبل الموت ورحمة عند الموت اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا وللمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات يا قاضي الحاجات. Oh Allah, today we gather here to bring about an international conference on social sciences and education. Make this international conference as a useful science assembly, as a medium of sharing useful ideas, knowledge, and experiences of scholars, researchers, and students of various disciplines. May the conference be organized to their benefit to our lives, broaden our knowledge, sign our ideas, and lead us to be successful, productive persons, which in turn will boost dignity of our nation. Oh Allah, protect us from unintended temptation, show us the right path, and give us knowledge to strengthen to perform good things equally, so us and make it clear to bad thing, and give us knowledge and strength to avoid them. Oh Allah, you are the one who can fulfill our dua. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Sabit Azinar Ahmad. Next agenda is keynote speaks from our speakers today. I would like to invite our moderator who will guide the discussion to Mrs. Ninuk Soliha Ahiro SSM Hub. Time is yours. Good morning, Mrs. Ninuk.
Yes, good morning.
Okay.
Sorry for the technical problems. Thank you very much, dear Master of Ceremony, for the time given to me.
You're welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you all in the 6th International Conference on Education and Social Science, held virtually by the Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang. It's a great honor for me to be here with you to facilitate the discussion in this plenary session, which today will present two speakers, and the two other speakers will present their material tomorrow. Before I go with you in this plenary session, let me introduce myself. I am Ninuk Soliha Ahiro from Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang. To open this session, I will start with giving the brief biography of the speakers in this plenary session. The first one is William Bradley Horton, PhD. He is an associate professor from the Faculty of Education and Human Studies, Akita University, Japan. He has been very familiar with Indonesia, I guess, and I'm sure that he can fluently speak Bahasa Indonesia. Dr. Harton has been finished his senior high school education in Yogyakarta, and he also attended some sandwich program in Universitas Negeri Malang or IKIP Malang, and also in Gajah Mada University. Dr. Harton is having interest on history and literature. He made a dissertation with the title History Unhinged, World War II and the Reshaping of Indonesian History. So Dr. Harton doing research on the history of Indonesia also. And the next, before I continue with the second speaker, let's give the warm welcome for Dr. Harton. Dr. Harton, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, the second speaker will be Professor Hans Paul. So sorry. Sorry, I'm going to have to fix some tech.
Coba cek suara teman-teman. Hello dear audience, can you hear my voice now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Good.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, I'll continue with the biography, the short biography of the second speakers for this season. That's Professor Hans Paul. He comes from School of History and Philosophy of Science, University of Sydney. His research interest is about history of medicine. From the curriculum video, we can see that he has been doing a lot of research in the health condition of the society, especially in Southeast Asia. For you who are interested in medicine on the perspective of history, you can do very much searching on some of his books, among which are Nurturing Indonesia, Medicine and Decolonization in the Dutch East Indies, Merawat Bangsa, Sejarah Pergerakan Para Dokter Indonesia Zaman Kolonial, and some other interesting books. Okay, I guess this is enough what I can inform you earlier before we start the discussion with the two speakers. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the presenter of the 6th International Conference on Education and Social Sciences, Mr. William Bradley Harton, PhD, and also Mr. Professor Hans Paul. Give big applause for them. Okay, thank you very much. Now we start the discussion, and the first speaker will be William Bradley Harton, PhD. For you, you have around 60 minutes to give explanation on your material. And after that, it will be continued by the second speaker. For Dr. Hatton, please, this is time for you.
Okay, thank you. So 16 minutes, yes?
60.
60 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I may end up finishing a little bit earlier. I thought it was 30 minutes, but we'll see how it goes. So let me put up my PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, you put it up for me. Thank you very much. Just a second. Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay. Is it better if I do the PowerPoint to control it, or can someone move it forward for me? I do it. Sorry, Japanese comes out. Okay. Let me put up the PowerPoint, and then I'll see whether that works. Okay. And then, oops. Okay. Well, maybe I think this is how I have to do it, if this is okay. Okay. First of all, let me say thank you to Pak Dekan, Professor Mustafa, to the committee, and also to Mrs. Nino for inviting me and for the wonderful introduction as well. I'm very happy to be joining the conference today. It's a long way from Akita, but I would be much happier if I could actually be there in Semarang today. But it's beautiful in Akita as well. Today, I would like to talk about digital humanities in the COVID era, the perspective of a historian of modern Indonesia from northern Japan. And so I want to start today with the words of Walter Benjamin. In unpacking my library, he said, "There is in the life of a collector a dialectical tension between the poles of order and disorder. Naturally, his existence is tied to many other things as well, to a very mysterious relationship to ownership, and also to a relationship to objects which does not emphasize their functional utilitarian value, that is, their usefulness, but studies them and loves them as the scene, the stage of their fate. For him, not only books, but also copies of books have their fates." Libraries and archives collect, but researchers like us collect as well. And while they're different from Benjamin's collector, there are important similarities and hints from which we can draw from Benjamin's words. Since research collections are the base for scholarship and for digital humanities, this image of books having a utilitarian value, shall we say the contents, and something more, we can say a life of their own, it seems to be a good image to start with today, and I'll return to it later. I think we already know that we make our best discoveries when we achieve disorder and then struggle again to return to order. So it's a nice quote to begin with. I'm joining the conference from Akita in northern Japan. Let me bring up the next slide. Here is Akita, the red area here. Akita is a remote province at the end of a 4-hour bullet train Shinkansen ride from Tokyo. It's the final station, the end of the main track. It's well, you can go farther, but it's almost as far as you can go. So very remote. As a response to COVID-19, the faculty and students at my university have been effectively banned from traveling outside the province. We have to stay there. And that makes the physical and intellectual isolation particularly significant. We are also completely banned from overseas travel. In such a remote location, the normal lack of materials becomes critical due to COVID-19. So you can't move from place to place to get materials, and collaborative work is much harder. My semi-orderly world with traveling back and forth to get research materials to teach classes in Tokyo and in Akita, it's been disrupted, and I need to find new solutions. Working on Indonesian history from such a location, from Akita, provides an opportunity to talk about changes in our world, our own efforts in pursuing digital humanities here in Japan, and the future of digital humanities and the study of Indonesian history. So I want to go on and talk about a project that I'm working on related to digitalization and digital humanities. I'm currently a participant in a project researching the pre-war and post-war networks related to Japanese occupation administrative networks. I'm also involved in leading a project related to malaria in Indonesia during World War II. So besides myself at Akita University, I have two other critical collaborators, Mayumi Yamamoto and Kaoru Kochi, who are based at Miyagi University in Sendai and at Kanda University of Foreign Studies. And so here on the map, I've put Miyagi and Tokyo, so you can see the distance. In our projects, and in the longer career of associated researchers like Professor Emeritus Aiko Kurasawa and Professor Emeritus Kenichi Goto, we have collected important materials related to Indonesian history: photocopies, photographs of documents, original books, magazines, newspapers, even recordings of interviews, lots of different things. Some of these are very rare items, and some are just copies from archives, but the archives have been reorganized, making archival materials difficult to find again. But all of these materials can be very helpful in doing research. With our materials scattered to more than 5 locations in Akita, Sendai, and Tokyo, and stored in cramped offices or apartments, access and use is difficult. I'm not even sure what we have. We need to make sure that this material is available to ourselves and our project researchers, but also to ensure that this material is preserved and available for researchers in the future. We also want to support and encourage research on related subjects anywhere in the world, including, of course, in Indonesia. What this means is some form of digitization. We have to digitize the material, and then some means of sharing materials via the internet. As we attempt to do this with limited time and resources, we're just professors. We just teach and do research. We're not technical staff or administrators, but we have to confront various problems and difficulties, and also conundrums, difficult problems that are not solvable, which I want to discuss with you today. Now, the core of our collection contains original material from a whole set of different types of things. We've collected about 210 different books and pamphlets published in Indonesia or a few published in Japan for use in Indonesia that are in Japanese, English, Indonesian, Javanese, and Sundanese. They're textbooks. There's a book about prisons in Japan, but it really intended for Indonesians to read. It was published in English. I believe that was published in Indonesian. There are books related to sports. There's books that are related to medicine, just about everything that you can imagine. We also have collected magazines such as Jawa Baru, Suara Miai, Panji Pustaka, Prajurit, Kampo, Indonesia Merdeka, Berita Radio, Pustaka Radio, Muslimin Sumatera Baru, and Kodomo Shimbun. There are a few more, but none of these are complete runs, but we do have a lot of things, so it makes it very important. We also have more than 1,844 issues of newspapers from the Japanese period from Java. These include newspapers like Asia Raya, Pembangun, Kungyong Pao, only the Malay edition. We don't have any of the Chinese edition. Suara Asia, Sinar Matahari, Sinar Baru from Semarang, and a number of other newspapers. Again, none of them are complete, but 1,844 issues is enough to be very important. We also have additional Japanese language publications from the Metropole related to Indonesia during the occupation. And this is in addition to the recently republished Jawa Shimbun, Borneo Shimbun. Jawa Shimbun is only in Japanese. Borneo Shimbun is in Japanese and in Indonesian, published in 3 different places, I believe, in Balikpapan, Banjarmasin, and Pontianak, I think. And so it's a mix of different things. Sumatra Shimbun, or there's only a small amount that's been republished from the copies that are in Perpustakaan Nasional. Or the older republished edition of Campo. We have all of these in the republished versions. There's Jawa Baru has been republished as well a long time ago, but we don't have copies of it because the libraries do. It's very expensive. I have original material for 90% of those as well. So we've also collected medical journals, books, some general newspapers and magazines from before and after the occupation. Pre-war materials provide the context for the occupation. Post-war materials show changes and provide explanations and information. So this material connected to the Japanese occupation period in some way actually covers a very wide subject range, allowing research on diverse subjects like literature, culture, education, medicine, and economy, just about everything. Considering that until recently, the Japanese occupation period was a blank space or a black space. There's just nothing there except for maybe stereotypes. It was very poorly covered by historians. So this material is really important. It's also largely not available online. And there are a few collections with this amount of material anywhere in the world. Probably the best collection might be in Niod in Amsterdam, but while they have good periodicals, they don't have as many books. So with that context of what we have been collecting for our own research, I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 era and internet resources, because that's kind of why we're here today. The COVID-19 era has encouraged dramatic changes in our increased utilization of the internet for collaboration and teaching. right now, half of my classes are being taught online and the other are face-to-face. But when the situation becomes bad, we teach even more now. Something new for us. But it's also excellent for intellectual exchange. And so we can gather today via Zoom. And so I'm very happy to be here with, I think I saw before it was more than 200 people. This was not possible before. So there have also been substantial increases in the use of online research materials. And so researchers working on the colonial era, Japanese occupation, or Indonesian revolution are probably familiar with many of the changes that have taken place in availability of primary sources over the last 2 decades. However, I think it's worth mentioning some of the critical sources and changes, for they certainly have not been one-way changes, and some of the materials don't last forever. So I'm going to kind of introduce some of my favorites and some of the most important ones. And so on the right hand of the slide here is the website for the Australian National, or the National Archive of Australia. And in the early 2000s, this was one of my favorite online databases. I was researching about Timor and the other islands in southeastern Indonesia during World War II. So Australian collections and their early efforts at digitization were really important. The main National Archive branch in Canberra would digitize 5 files per year on request. So amazingly, all of my relatives, including my great-grandmother who had already died, and my baby, all of them became very interested in Indonesian history, registered in the National Archive, and we requested 5 additional files. So it was very wonderful. So this was a very clumsy database, just organized by file, and it was very close to the original archive. So one file might have 2 pages, or it might have 200 pages. And because the individual documents were not identified, it was hard to use. And so researchers still might find it useful to go to our 2008 annotated bibliography about Timor in World War II for information. A second one that up to a few years ago was my favorite source, and that was the NEO database of newspaper articles from the Japanese occupation. And they seemed to take almost random, they didn't put everything in, but it was almost a random mix of NEO's big collection of Indonesian newspapers from the immediate pre-war period through the revolutionary period. And they had OCR, not very good, but it allowed us to search for little pieces of information which would almost never be discovered unless people have a lot of time to do reading each issue day by day, article by article. So I use this for somebody is connected up here.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry. We are trying to solve this.
If you do a zentai no mute, 大丈夫になると思います。
Yes, yes.
Yang realnya kayak gimana?
Mohon maaf untuk panitia. Ada suara masuk.
Sudah.
Okay. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you. You can go on.
Maybe.
I'm sorry, Dr.
Yeah.
Harton.
Okay, so I used the NEO database when I was researching about, for example, Abdul Karim MS who was a political leader and journalist who was sent to Bovendigul in the 1920s, but then was in Medan in the 1930s and through the Japanese occupation. And so the newspaper, using NEOD's database, I could find I could find little pieces of information that were very helpful, and for other research also. But it disappeared. The local internet the internet and then local access was eliminated in part because of legal concerns. So they closed it all down. And so, but hopefully the NEOD database will now appear at Leiden University Library, but we don't know when or if it will be available off campus. So similarly, similarly, materials which had been available offline from KITLV and KIT, the Tropen, were physically transferred to Leiden University Library. They had to close their libraries. And so when they transferred the original material, they also had to transfer the online data. And so that resulted in some of the things sometimes being available and sometimes disappearing. Other things, let me go to the next slide. Oh, no, this is the right one. KB, the National Library of the Netherlands, their website Delpher on the left side of the slide has an immense database of Dutch language newspapers and books. I think probably some of you already know that. And it has even more material. It's searchable with downloads of PDFs and OCR texts available, so it's easier to translate. Delpher allows anyone to locate minor references in very diverse publications. Numerous rare books and journals have also become available to researchers through Delpher. So it's really great source. The National Archives of the Netherlands has a website, and they've started to make the documents related to Indonesian history available. That's also wonderful. I haven't used it very much. I used it a lot in person. Perpusnas, the National Library in Jakarta, also provides access not just to research publications, which are normally behind paywalls, very good service, but also digital copies of some periodicals, some newspapers, and many Balai Pustaka publications. But unfortunately for me, most of it is not available to people outside of Indonesia. So, but it is a very important source. And finally, I go to Japan. Japanese sources, now I go to the next slide, I hope. Okay. Japanese sources are very scattered, but there's some important ones. For example, on the left side the left side of this, where it says the Iwakura mission, this is JCAR, or JACAR, which provides access to military and foreign affairs documents from government archives, but they're mostly in Japanese. Asahi Shimbun has their newspapers available through an online database. Unfortunately, these are behind a paywall, so you can't access it unless your university makes a contract. For much of 2020, 2021, because of the pandemic, post-1945 newspapers were made available free to the public, but only after 1945. So for me, studying World War II didn't help. So anyway, these are a small selection, but some of the most important online sources for Indonesian history today. Most of these materials were already available before COVID-19. And of course, if you think about it, it's obvious because many of the archives, like NEOD, have had to close because of COVID-19 or work shorthanded, and so they can't start new projects. And this is something that affects us working as well. So what changed was utilization, These resources became more important when visits to the archives and the libraries became impossible. So now I can't even go to Tokyo to go to an archive or a library. Probably in Semarang, you can't go to Jakarta to go to the National Library or the National Archives. And all of us can't go to the Netherlands to do research there. So we become more dependent on digital humanities. Now, I think we all understand now that digital resources are good. I love them. But sometimes we have to stop and think, is more better? And the answer is, of course, sometimes more is better. But what are some of the problems? And so one of the problems with digitization is that resources get put behind paywalls. Especially if they are private companies or institutions that digitize, very often they are behind paywalls. And that means that they benefit an elite group, especially people in Europe or America at the biggest universities. Even in Europe and America, at small universities, maybe not. In Japan, bigger universities have good access. Universities like mine, not so good access. And so because they're behind paywalls, many of us are left out. We cannot use those materials, other people can. And so this is something that is a problem in digitization. Number two, making things free online results in decontextualization of documents. And this is a little bit of a problem. I'll talk about it in a minute. So I just want to mention it now. And then I want to go to the third one, which is that making everything available in an easy decontextualized form makes it possible for some researchers to quickly produce papers and books on a subject. And so they can go to a database, search for something, tick, 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 tick. They get some sources, quickly write a paper, boom. But other researchers who spend years carefully reading documents, doing interviews, doing research and understanding the period and the people that they're talking about, by the time they try to publish, it's not so, people think it's not so important because someone else already wrote an article, or even worse, those other people already got a job and so they can't get a job. So the making everything available in an easy to use form actually can damage the careers of dedicated scholars. It provides a reward for doing shallow work, but it penalizes more careful scholarship that provides important insights on society. And so we have to be careful. There has to be a balance, I think, between making things available so people can do work, but also making sure that all scholars are protected, especially if they work carefully. So let me go on to the the subject of digital decontextualization. And so I started, actually, I'm going to bounce the slide back to the beginning. And I started today with a quote from my favorite essay by Walter Benjamin. I really love this, this essay, Unpacking My Library, probably because I am a collector. In this essay and elsewhere, Benjamin attempts to describe not just the relationship of a collector to the things that he collects, but also to convey a sense of the uniqueness of each item. Every little book or thing that is collected has something unique. And in the pre-modern world, this uniqueness was given. Everyone understood it. It was automatic. Books had to be reproduced by hand. People had to write them. And so everyone was different. And then after one person wrote it, then each book, very rare item, would collect meaning as it went from hand to hand, person to person, from place to place. And now with mechanical printing, mechanical reproduction, there's still layers of meaning with it, but with the mechanical reproduction that started centuries ago, we've lost it bit by bit. And so let me give an example of that. Let's see if I can get back. Where are we? Okay. This is one example. A copy of Anatatur, that is to say Pramudya, his very rare Kranji dan Bekasi Jatu, was once in my collection. According to someone on the internet earlier this year, there are 5 copies. But for a long time, no one had any copies. I bought it with a whole box of Pramudya's books from the Jakarta book dealer Jaya Laras in the 1990s. He was a tremendous book dealer. He was the king of used books from 1970s to 1990s. And some time ago, it passed from my hands and I traded it for several special books from the Japanese occupation. This is a wonderful book, but I have to do research. And so I could get research materials by trading it. And so it went from me to someone else. And now I discovered it's gone to someone else again. And so it keeps changing hands. And each time it changes, each time when I give it to someone else, it develops its own history. And so when I saw this on the internet, this isn't my picture, but there are also other pictures on the internet which are not my picture. And I know this is my book. I had this one. The history of one book sometimes can be very, 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 very important, not just to the collector, but also to historians. The history of a book might explain, this book is from 1947. So how did it survive through the revolution? How did it survive through the turmoil of 1965, 1967, or through longer periods of time? Just books fall apart. So, of course, you all know that Pramudya's works, just like those of well-known communists like Aidit or Nyoto, whose books I also have found, they were banned and dangerous to keep. How could copies survive? And each copy tells us a little bit about how that happened. Other books have library stamps that tell us about forgotten libraries. One of my favorite libraries is Perpustakaan Taman Baca, I think, Ashik in Banjarmasin. It was a library that was in Banjarmasin from right before Japanese occupation, also during the Japanese occupation, and after the Japanese occupation. And I have some books that have the stamp, and that's how I learned about it. But only much later did I discover that the girl who sat in the lending library and wrote down who was borrowing books, she graduated from UI and then taught Indonesian language in Italy for many years. So we learn all sorts of different things starting from just the stamps. So even though these library stamps tell us about forgotten libraries, they also give us hints about potential readers. Every copy of a book has a story and it can teach us something. So that's what I'm talking about. We lose a little bit of it with the mechanical reproduction because books are books, but still a little bit of it remains. at least with real collections. And archival sources are similar. Documents from the past were created for special reasons and then were preserved for other reasons. And when we use the archives, and many of you may have used archives in Jakarta or regional archives, some people even maybe went to Den Haag and used archives. We need to know about why they created the documents in order to be able to find our documents. Also, it helps us understand and interpret the documents we don't find when we're looking for something. And also, we need to know it because we see many documents that we don't expect to see, surprises. So we're left with a document when we digitize and we create searchable databases. We start to lose layers of meaning. And so we're left with a document. So when we search on the internet and we find a document, boom, it's just like it dropped magically from the sky after we prayed that we could find this, we just need this document, and boom, there it is. We have a really fast, but it's a shallow and empty history. Of course, we're very happy when we get such a document. I'm happy. It's better to have a document than not have a document, but it's also true that there's a little bit of an emptiness. When we find it in the context of an archive or in a collection, then it gives us more information. Another critical element of digital decontextualization and databasing is more practical. So from the 1950s, we saw a gradual process of moving away from the old colonial histories. And we moved towards histories that are more autonomous or Southeast Asia-centric, Indonesia-centric, and more inclusive of normal people in their lives, not just administrators in the Dutch bureaucracy. The very success of the Dutch National Archives and also Delpher, it could lead to a revitalized colonial history, a new colonial history built around the Dutch bureaucratic visions and structured and conveyed in Dutch language. It's not just the rebirth of colonial perspective that's scary, but also that it might seem invisible to many users of Delpher, because many of the users of Delpher are already Indonesians. And one of the problems is that there's no balance in the archives. They're all Dutch sources. I love them, but still it's a danger. Perhaps even the vision of military bureaucrats in the Japanese government hierarchy could become the dominant image in the history of the Japanese occupation. But I think that's kind of unlikely, because even in Japan, the histories constructed by the winners, the Dutch, the Americans, and even Indonesians, they were more able to construct the history of the occupation than the Japanese were. So I don't think it will ever become dominant, but it could. It could, because of the new archival sources coming online. So, and then one additional thing is, if historians or other scholars no longer travel and experience different places, whether the sites of events changed as they may be, I can't come to Semarang to see various important places. Even though they're different than in the 1920s or 19 teens, to see them gives me some ideas, but I can't do that. Or the final repositories of historical documents, whether it's the archives in Jakarta or in the Netherlands. If we don't see those things, then the history writing becomes a little bit impoverished. I think Benjamin would agree to this. And even more importantly, when we divide up each document and each newspaper article, so instead of one big newspaper page, we have each article separately, like the NEO database. This leaves the historian with a much closer picture to what they thought they were going to see. So they hunt for what they want to see and they see what they want to see. They don't see the other things. They don't see what's most important or what's complete. If they're lucky, they do see what's most important, but they might be wrong. This is a big risk of digitalization and databaseization. So, okay. Oops, sorry. Next, I want to talk a little bit more, going back to what I'm working on myself. Most of the digital archives that I talked about earlier, NEOD, Delphi, the National Archives in Australia or the Netherlands, these are created by large institutions. They have big, broad coverage covering everything. They have big staffs, large budgets. But most of us are just individual scholars. Almost no money. We're working alone or with one or two friends or colleagues. And our principal job is not digitization, but teaching and research. So our collections are smaller and more focused. We collect them for our research, not just to make a collection. And so the contributions, the methods, and the limits of our contributions are very different. So as I mentioned before, the researchers that I've been working with on the Japanese occupation period primarily were 3 full-time faculty members in Chiba, Sendai, and Akita. Chiba is right next to Tokyo. Together, we've collected all these original materials, photocopies of materials that we need for our research. And the core of the material is the newspapers, I think, but also maybe magazines. And the hundreds of books are also unique. But each researcher also has photocopies, photographs, scans, videotapes, recordings. And sometimes these are no longer available in the original. And this is something that a large institution can't have. And so I think I have, yeah, I do have a little bit of time. I can tell you a story of some photocopies. In 1996, Waseda University had a research institution called the Institute of Social Sciences, very important research institution, and it closed down. It became what's now known as the Asia Pacific, the global, or the, the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies, and also a research center by the same name. But when they closed down, they had to send all of their material in their library to the central library of the university. Right before they closed, a researcher brought microfilm. He bought the microfilm from Cornell University or from Perpustaka Nacional or somewhere. And Waseda University printed out, spent a lot of money and printed out all of the newspapers. Sinar Baru was one of them. They printed it out from the microfilm, put them in beautiful blue cases, and then they closed the library and sent it to the central library. The central library got the photocopies, but they don't have the microfilm. It's copyrighted material, but it's registered as property of the university, so they can't throw it away. So they can't throw it away, but they can't own it. It's illegal. So they put them on a cart in the main office by the front door. The only one who knew it was there, for 10 years, the only one who knew it was there was me. And I could go to the counter and I could say, "Can I see Sinar Baru?" And they bring out the cart and let me sit in a table and look at the photocopies. No pictures, no photocopying, but I could look at them. So this is one of the differences with a big library. They have strict rules. They must follow strict rules related to copyrights and other things. With a small collection of researchers, it's much easier to do different things. So it's one of the differences that we have. So small researcher-created archives, online or in person, can serve different functions. So in an online archive created by major research institutions, you might be able to find really rare items that you want, if you know what you want. They have too much stuff. You can't go to the shelf and look at it. But in a collection focused on the Japanese occupation of Indonesia, like what we're creating, it's much smaller, and it's much more likely that a researcher would discover something new that they didn't expect to find, a surprise. And this, the smaller archives also can kind of serve as a teacher to guide student researchers. If students can go find original material, then when they read a book written by professors or for their class, they then have real material from the time period that they can look at, and they can understand better what is written. So it kind of serves as guidance and helps them to learn to read critically. So these smaller archives, especially online, can provide very different benefits. Sorry, let me see, where am I? Okay. So in our part-time work trying to create online resources, me and my partners have faced numerous issues. Where we have sources that are photocopied from libraries, archives, or from other collectors, can we make digital copies available to the public? And in many cases, the answer is no. If I copy from Leiden University, can I make it available? Probably not. If I borrow something from Patwasino and photocopy it, can I put it on our archive website? And probably the answer is no. Maybe he would say yes, but it's we don't know. And so what about archival or material that has vanished? If you have used Perpustakaan Nasional, you probably know of material that has disappeared. I can tell you stories of when I was in the old library in Salemba. On the 5th floor, in the back of the stacks, where they swept pieces of paper, books that fell apart, that just get thrown away. Other books disappeared. So what about if we have photocopies of books that have disappeared from Perpustakaan Nasional? Can we put those available online? It's really difficult. But for us, the answer must be that we digitize it. We have to save this information for history. We have to make it available for at least some researchers to use, even if we can't make it public. It's our responsibility. But how do we do it? What about documents copied from archives like NIOD or National Archive in Den Haag that were reorganized? It's a legal problem. Probably no. But it's very helpful for researchers who are reading old books and want to find the original sources. It's not possible with the new numbers. It's really difficult. So these things can be very, very, very helpful, but it's a problem. But still, digitizing can help save it, even if we can't put it publicly online. And to give another example, the Dutch Foreign Ministry almost certainly cleaned up their files before they sent them to the National Archive. I'm very, very certain that they threw away very, very important materials. So if our researchers have notes or copies of that material, this is something, it's now gone from the world. And so this is really important. Can we make it available? Should we digitize it? Yes. Other problems, how do we digitize extra large or fragile material? Now, this is a large part of our material, and it's a problem that I've had for almost 10 years. In 2013, I bought an A3 scanner in the picture here, and you can see this newspaper from Suara Asia is much bigger than the A3 scanner. How do you do it? Even more, when the newspaper opens up, then it's 2 times bigger than that. How do you scan it? It's very difficult for us to do. What kind of data form do we use? Where do we host the data? If it's on a university server, what happens when we retire or change jobs? All of those are problems. Who does the work? In the COVID-19 era, who can do it? It's really hard. Social spacing, limited contact between people. Who pays for it? We've been lucky. Miyagi University has provided limited amounts of money to help. Here you can see a project room with actually a professor in computing and science that is helping us. And here he is rearranging the cables for our scanners. But every year we have to try to get new money. And so there's no guarantee that next year we'll have money or that we'll have the room again. So our dream is to make more materials available online. Perhaps in creating this archive, we'll find a way for these wartime materials to find a permanent home, their fate, but also a way for them to be useful in creating a more complete history of Indonesia and to allow future generations to experience a little bit more holistically that period of Indonesian history. And just in conclusion, I think in the end, there's a very narrow path that we have to pass down on this extremely important process of expanding digital humanities. And while original paintings, for example, in the Louvre, still hold a draw for many, the impact of digitalization is very important and even more in the field of history and will shape our future history of the Indonesian past. And so with that, I want to thank again the State University of Semarang for hosting this discussion today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Harton, for the very nice explanation on the many abnormalities of doing research due to the pandemic situation right now. If I can sum up from the interesting explanations of Dr. Harton, he do a comparison between the research doing before the pandemic era and after the pandemic era. He also gave us a very nice experience of doing direct research in some historical spots, whether in Indonesia or in the Netherlands or in Japan. He started with a very interesting experience of doing that research. And then after that, Dr. Harton also explained about the problems, some of the weaknesses of doing research with digital information only, digital data only. Although there are sufficient source of resource like National Archive of Australia, National Archive of the Netherlands, and also in Indonesia there are Perpustakaan Nasional, Balai Pustaka, and many other sources. But the digital sources, according to Dr. Harton, there are some weaknesses. Among them are some resources are behind paywalls, so there are people who can access it and others cannot. And also the one which is given emphasized by Dr. Harton is about decontextualization of document. This part has many parts to be explained in detail. He also mentioned about digital decontextualization, and I guess this is a very interesting topic. Later, for the audience and the participants of this conference, after we finish with the second speakers, you will have 30 minutes to have a question and answer sessions with Dr. Harton. And if you have already got your interesting question, you can also start it to write down your question and put it on the chat of this Zoom. Only for the written version, yeah. For the direct question will be accommodated after we finish with the second speaker. Okay. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Harton, for the nice experience and also some amazing explanation about doing research on history in the digitalized era of COVID-19 pandemic era. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, now we move to the second speaker for Professor Hans Paul. He will give material about the history of medicine. Without wasting any more time, now we proudly present Professor Hans Paul. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me to share my screen, I can put up my PowerPoint. Okay, I can't share my screen yet.
Okay, you may do it by yourself.
It says the host has disabled screen sharing.
Wait. Untuk rekan-rekan panitia, apakah masih ada screen yang di-share? Mohon untuk dihentikan jika masih ada, supaya Prof. Hansful bisa melanjutkan.
Ya sudah di-stop kayak.
Yes.
Ah. Okay. Okay, if you make it full screen, then anyway, the conference theme is a lot about digitization, etc. And now I will talk not about the viruses you might get if you download files from whatever archive, but less interestingly, real-life viruses that are sadly making our life much more difficult around now. And of course, everybody's mind is on COVID for all kinds of reasons, quite understandably. So I will look at epidemics in history, Indonesia and worldwide. Lanjut. Next, yep. Epidemics are unusually interesting, both from a medical, historical, sociological, and ethnographic anthropological perspective. They are a very interesting tool of analysis. Francis Bacon, the philosopher of science, said, to know the lion, you need to squeeze its tail. Of course, you can do this at home with your cat or your dog, right? Squeeze its tail, see what happens. You will find out much more about your animal than you do while observing it being asleep. Epidemics do the same thing to human societies. They shake things up, cause trouble, cause anxiety, gives opportunities to governments to demonstrate that they can implement solutions with the assistance of medicine. And sadly, what we have seen with this epidemic, this pandemic, shows very well for governments worldwide their inability to deal with it. It leads to fear and panic, leads to all kinds of reactions by medicine, by governments, and by individuals. It's also a breeding ground for fake news and hoaxes. Now, I know Indonesia has its fair share of hoaxes and fake news. This is a worldwide trend, unfortunately, and they are really very fruitful during pandemic times. Of course, the opportunists everywhere who want to use epidemics for their own advantage, and we see this right now as well. Lanjut. We see intense fear. And of course, when the possibility of dying or observing friends and relatives, close relatives, dying around you, this leads to a state of mind. I'll get some water, 1 second. This leads to a panicky and fearful state of mind. In the Middle Ages, when the Black Death and all kinds of other epidemics raged around Europe, they blamed the Jews or the Chinese. Now, of course, for this pandemic, the Jews are not blamed, but the Chinese even more. And of course, there is some argument to be made that COVID-19 came from China, but not so much the Chinese should be blamed for it. Individuals with leprosy, that's not an epidemic, but have always been stigmatized and scapegoated. And we see this right now, that many people in Indonesia, many of them died, very few of them officially from COVID, because it's a stigmatized condition by now. Whatever happens in our lives, we're always eager to explain what is going on. In the Middle Ages, there was always explanations referring to lack of religious devotion, ignorance, lack of hygiene, people being primitive. And we remember, of course, the first person in Indonesia to get COVID-19. She was lambasted on social media. She was was she a yoga instructor or something? But she was already marked within 10 minutes as a prostitute who clearly that way must have gotten COVID-19 and spread it. And interestingly, I think the Ministry of Health published her name and address. What? What were they thinking? So she had to leave her neighborhood. This is, of course, not unique to Indonesia. We see this everywhere. We want someone to blame, however unlikely, to get a sense maybe that we have a little bit of control. Medicine talks a lot about hygiene and transmission and avoiding transmission. That is social distancing and staying at home as measures. The Minister of Health of Indonesia, Terawan, who has been fired because really he wasn't up to the job, initially said, just pray and eat well and you will be fine. And well, history has not been kind to those words. Then there are lots of hoaxes in the Western world. People claim Bill Gates for having caused this pandemic, and the vaccines contain little microchips that get into our body and can control this. 5G transmission of phone towers, etc. The craziest theories. There's already a fear of vaccinations. Indonesia got its own recent hoax around that they all contain pork and therefore are haram. And they thrive in these environments of pandemics. We all have read Michel Foucault and said, oh yes, pandemics demonstrate the power of governments to regulate our life. The government can put cities in lockdown, can mandate us to stay home. What we have seen actually most of the time is, yes, governments have given themselves that power, but most often governments have been terrible at managing these breakouts. Whenever pandemics happen, there's always a choice of, is health the most important thing or the economy? If health is the most important thing, you just say everybody stay home, nobody leave the house for a couple of months, but clearly then people will die of hunger because they don't make any money. This is not a solution. So there's always a bit of a balance between economic factors and health factors, and it is very easy to get that wrong. Also, when there is a new pandemic like COVID-19, nobody really knows ahead of time the characteristics of transmission and ways to prevent its spread. So it's always a guess to see what is happening and what can be done best. Lanjut. Here, these are some headlines from the Jakarta Post. The antivirus necklace, which was made of eucalypt, I think was an unusually interesting innovation. Of course, there is no guarantee that that will do anything. Lanjut. Another question to ask from a sociological perspective, who is affected most? Social class, like with most disease, is a very important factor. If you have to stay at home, that is very good if you have a nice house with a very nice internet connection. But for lots of people living in the desa or the kampung, that is not an option. Partly because they need to participate in the cash economy to make some money, and partly because houses can be very small. Learning from home, again, for middle class students, that is great. For poor students, that is impossible because there is no computer at home and there is no internet at home. In the West, a lot of people have been classified as essential workers. Probably in Indonesia, these are the delivery drivers from Grab and GoFood and Gojek. Because if we want to stay at home, we still have to get our food, so we order it with GoFood. So those people who deliver it to our homes, they are most at risk, but they cannot refuse to work because they are essential. What pandemics show is the limits of human intervention. Interventions do not always deliver, or maybe if we look at this pandemic and compare the responses of different countries, very often they do not. Secondly, government can do all kinds of things, but people are difficult to govern. Most of us don't mind staying at home for a week or 2 weeks, but then we get restless and want to get out, and we see protests all around the world. The government should not be able to determine my everyday behavior, or they just want to get out. Often there is lack of political will, because no government wants to overreact, shut everything down when there is no reason for it. And as Donald Trump said, this disease will just go away. We're still waiting, and eventually it will go away, but we are not there yet. Lamju. Pandemics make us feel very much that we have a lack of control and that we are powerless. There's very little we can do. We just have to accept fate or see what is going to happen. Now, that's not very human. And there are all kinds of local initiatives in Indonesia that kampungs have shut themselves off to make sure that transmission doesn't get there. Some examples to the right. This is sometimes quite effective and is also illustrates that when the central government fails to do anything meaningful, that local government still can do very effective interventions. Conspiracy theories everywhere. I'm not sure what the favorite Indonesian conspiracy theory is right now, but lots of fake news, of course, scapegoating, miracle cures. We saw the eucalypt leaves. I don't think many people actually believe that. And there are also religious responses that give us a sense of control, even if it's illusory. If we think we are in control, it makes us feel better, even if it turns out to be incorrect. Medical ingenuity. We have seen quite a bit of that. The delivery of the vaccine is faster than anything else in history. Now, there are some problems with some of the vaccines. I won't go into that. But other public health measures like social distancing have proven to be effective if they could be implemented consistently. One of the first reactions throughout history against these epidemics is quarantine, erecting borders, barriers, and restricting movement. Again, there's the thing that is health most important, or the economy, or do we need to balance this out? But it's still a standard response. We see this in the Middle Ages, we see this today. So many of the lessons that we have learned again with COVID-19, we already see throughout history. Lanjut. Closing the borders. I haven't been to Indonesia for over a year because as an Australian, I'm not allowed to leave. Well, I could ask for permission to leave, but I need to have very good reasons. And saying that I really miss all my friends in Indonesia doesn't count. It is very hard as a non-Australian to get into Australia. You also need to ask for permission. In the meantime, goods still circulate, so Australia imports and exports its goods all the time. And we see here, gosh, this is probably from the 19th century, an attempt to deal with the cholera by erecting a quarantine boundary. Lanjut. Here you see painting from the Middle Ages. I think it's the Black Death. You can see that the people in the painting are not happy. The whole city seems to be devastated. Lots of dead bodies right there. We see a couple of saints there in the top looking down. I think they also don't know quite what to do. So this is quite a scene of despair that comes on the heels of an epidemic. Lanjut. Here we see a doctor who has invented all kinds of ways to keep himself safe from the Black Death. The idea indeed was that disease spreads to foul-smelling air. So what do? You start to smoke cigars and you have incense that probably smells even worse. And the idea is that you then make a barrier around yourself. You see also this doctor carries some herbs there in the baskets and has a cart with all kinds of things. And on his head, there seems to be a pot with boiling stuff. This sounds all really interesting, but it's effective. I don't think so, but it still gives this doctor a sense of control. Lanjut. Here we see one of the most predictable responses to any kind of disease. That is, this person has invented a germ destroyer. What it is, I don't know. It could be just plain water, or it could be some jamu, or it could be alcohol. But if you promise, I have this special drink, it makes you invulnerable to disease, it builds up your immunity, people will buy it. So lots of people make lots of money out of these things. I think in this pandemic, COVID-19, there are very few claims for miracle cures. Although I could be wrong, and I would be delighted to hear during the Q&A from the audience if there's any examples in Indonesia. Lanjut. This is the Spanish flu. This is the very field hospital in Kansas. Why it is called the Spanish flu is a bit of a miracle. Nobody, it doesn't come from Spain, but nobody wanted to say, oh, this is our flu. So I think the French called it the Spanish flu, the Spanish called it the French flu, the Americans might have called it also the Spanish flu. It's actually started in the United States, around this area in Kansas. And because World War I was at its end, soldiers were being demobilized and all went home. And this provided a fantastic conduit to get this Spanish flu all over the world. I'll come back to the Spanish flu in a second. Lanjut. Lanjut. Pandemics in the Dutch East Indies. Well, there were quite a few, and also quite a different reasons why they got there. Smallpox affected the population of the Dutch East Indies, Indonesians, quite a bit, as it did people elsewhere in the world. And it follows exploration and colonization. After Columbus goes to America, as well, allegedly the first European, smallpox started to rage right there. This happened elsewhere in the world where Europeans arrived. Mortality rate could be up to 30% higher for babies and toddlers. Why were Europeans not affected? Well, I will tell you the secret of the bulle, right? Why is the bulle able to withstand disease? Because Europeans had been living in cities for centuries. And cities are absolutely filthy and disgusting. Cities are the places where anyone would get sick. Until 1900, population of large cities only grew because of migration to cities, because so many people died there, because there were no sewers, there was no fresh drinking water. If you accumulate human beings in one spot, human waste start to accumulate, you have the ideal conditions for disease. In a way, for human beings to leave the nomadic lifestyle behind and move to cities, at first start to do agriculture, that's just really bad from a health perspective. Once you do health agriculture, all diseases that affect animals can also affect human beings. And once you create cities, yeah, things go really, really bad. Fortunately, smallpox has been eradicated in 1980 worldwide, which is a really fortunate thing. The lesson to learn is that once migration happens on global scale, diseases follow and travel people and affect new populations that have not yet built up immunity in the long term against them. And this is one of the sad stories of colonization. After more Europeans moved to the Americas, lots of the indigenous population died because of all the diseases they had never been exposed to and they had not built resistance to. And the smallpoxes also happened in Asia, Lanjut. The colonial administration of the Dutch East Indies, Hindia Belanda, organized extensive smallpox vaccination campaigns. And interestingly, the knowledge about vaccination preceded modern medicine and, for example, was already in use in Turkey, in Constantinople, because people had observed if someone has smallpox, you need to scratch their skin where they have these pustules and then scratch it in a healthy skin. You get a little bit of smallpox, but enough for the body to build up resistance. The Dutch had a ship with about 12 young boys, orphans. They infected each one in turn so that they could bring the fresh inoculation material to the Dutch East Indies, and then they organized these big campaigns, Lanjut. And many Indonesian doctors, Dr. Jawa from the Stovia, participated in these big campaigns. Lanjut. This is the Pasteur Institute in Bandung, now the headquarters of Kimia Pharma, where they made the material. Lanjut. The vaccination campaigns the Dutch organized were not based on public health education. Basically, either they had the village head or the army come round up everybody. Everybody was vaccinated, whether they wanted it or not. Smallpox became endemic, but the compulsory vaccine had quite a bit of effect. Smallpox was a long-term threat, but medical intervention resolved it. And this is one of the great success stories of modern medicine. Sadly, it's one of the few success stories. Lanjut. Second epidemic affecting the Dutch East Indies was cholera. Cholera came to the Dutch East Indies repeatedly. Now, cholera is a really fascinating disease because people can wake up in the morning healthy, have lunch, start to feel bad, and die by the evening. The symptoms come up with severe diarrhea, vomiting. The body basically completely dehydrates. The body becomes blue, your lymph nodes turn black. So the appearance is quite striking, and it strikes very sudden. How does it spread? Through water. So once affected people have severe diarrhea, the germ ends up in the water. If water is used as drinking water, see the pictures right here. And I want to emphasize the carabao in the bottom picture is innocent. You have the ideal conditions to spread this disease. When cities did not have sewers, and when the water that was used for cleaning, for going to the toilet and drinking water Yes, it is just bound to happen. The origin, everybody says, is in the Ganges River Delta, and it is transmitted through travel. Lanju. This is the American city of Milwaukee, where they basically said no ship is allowed to come in because, as you can see, here is the cholera on the ship. And that hat that that figure is wearing looks like a fez, right? So kind of indicates that this might be a Muslim, might be a person coming from the Middle East. This was quite centrally believed in the 19th and early 20th century. Lanjut. The solution, public health, fresh drinking water, sewers. And here, audience from Semarang. Semarang started this with the pharmacist Tillema, who became very wealthy by selling Hygeia, bottled mineral water, and Dr. De Vogel, Dr. Burung. From Unarang, they made fresh water available all over the city, in the houses of Europeans, but also in the kampong. So once that was realized, cholera did not come back to Semarang, Lanjut. From there on, there were lots of initiatives of kampung improvement. And Tillema was very important here. And as Brad knows, he also was an amateur photographer, so collected lots of pictures. Here, Tillema would say, look at this kampung. Of course, everybody gets sick. So let's fix it up. Lanjut. This is the fresh new kampung that is healthy, with sewers, fresh drinking water. Of course, this is imposing standards of living on Indonesians. Nonetheless, one could really argue that Indonesians benefited from this. Lanjut. This is the map of the cholera. Came from the Ganges River. From there, through trade and travel, it went to China, but also to Europe, and from there to the United States. And you can see that the Red Sea played a central role in its transmission. And the biggest fear from Europe was that pilgrims going to the Hajj would transmit it. Lanjut. Because you had people, Muslims coming from Europe, Muslims coming from Indonesia, enormous groups of people would get together, you create the ideal conditions for transmission. Partially, of course, this reveals a bias that Europeans were kind of afraid of Muslims and what they were up to, so they were easily blamed and scapegoated. Lanjut. So the Dutch came up with lots of measures to try to do something about this. And one is Pulau Onrust in just in front of the coast in Jakarta. They made it into a quarantine station. Lanjut. And here there's some old-fashioned painting. Lanjut. A bit more recent. Lanjut. A picture, I think from the 1930s. Lanjut. Onrust, and you can still go there if you're in Jakarta. On a boat trip, it has still some of the original barracks. Initially, it was a prison. Then it was a colony for lepers. Then became a quarantine station. And in 1965, it became a prison for alleged communists. So it is an island where highly stigmatized people were being banished to. The quarantine rules were applied rather differently to Indonesians and to Europeans. All Indonesians who went on Hajj, upon return, had to spend 30 days on Onrust Island. No choice, compulsory. Europeans in principle had to do so, but they could also fill in a form declaring, I will visit my doctor, and my doctor will declare that I'm healthy, and if I'm not healthy, I will stay at home. They had to pay a security fee, let's say 10 juta rupiah, and they would get the feedback once they have been to their doctor. Of course, for most Indonesians, this was completely impossible to pay. So it's not that the rules say Indonesians need to be treated differently, but the way the rules are set up benefits one group over another group. Once a ship was infected, the ship captain had to put out a big yellow flag as an indication, and of course everybody also had to go to Onrust Island. Health regulations were applied based on race, nationality, gender, socioeconomic class. Back then, as in today. And yes, the Australian border is closed, but it seems that Hollywood stars can fly in and out and can organize their own quarantine. Of course, the justification is that they revived the Australian film industry, but still, there are exceptions for some people. Lanjut. The cholera was a very sudden threat because it could kill within a few hours. It caused a lot of anxiety. The wealthy would flee the city. Now, that is a really terrible thing to do because that causes the spread of the disease even further. Lots of protective devices and charms and prayers. People would sell them on the street, be they Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, ways to build up immunity or protection in an imaginary way. Blaming India and China as the origin of the disease happened everywhere. The Dutch East Indies government would blame the natives, Indonesians, because of the lack of hygiene. That's always a very easy conclusion to draw, because then you can at least say that you yourself are doing everything right. The sick and the poor die in much higher numbers because their immunity is much lower, and therefore it's also very easy to just attack and blame the victims. Measures were undertaken that were differential towards Europeans, Indonesians. Lanjut. Lanjut. Medical ingenuity here helped quite a bit. This example is very well known in the history of medicine. In 1854, the cholera hit London. Then a doctor called John Snow just investigated in which neighborhoods around which water pumps the cholera came. And because some pumps, Hollywood had it, and other pumps, nobody had it. Turns out the pumps that got water from upriver, there was no cholera, but the businesses that got their water from beyond London, the polluted water, yes, of course, everybody got cholera. Now, this was knowledge before the germ theory was known. Nonetheless, through this simple experiment, he was able to come up with some preventative measures that worked quite well. There's a question there in the chat as in why were the differential rules for Europeans and Indonesians? Well, officially and on paper, those rules were not different. Everybody had to be in quarantine, except if you could pay 10 juta, then you could go straight home and go to your doctor and get your fee back. Europeans could pay that, a lot of money. Indonesians couldn't. Rules were often more strictly applied. Indeed, coming back from the Hajj, everybody had to go in quarantine, whether they were European or Indonesian. But in fact, of course, they were only Indonesians. So this challenge in the Dutch East Indies was to formulate your rules that you do not officially discriminate, but in practice, you do. Lanjut. Spanish flu. A worldwide pandemic that looks very much like COVID-19. Spread very quickly after World War I. It infected around 500 million people, at that time a third of the world population. And it's hard to estimate how many people died, somewhere between 22 and 50 million. interestingly, the response in the Dutch East Indies was very unimpressive. And it is almost like the response to COVID in some countries. It's just like the ordinary flu, nothing to worry about. The colonial administration didn't do anything, even though they knew from the newspapers it was coming and that it had hit elsewhere. It hit the Dutch East Indies relatively late in 1919, but yet there was no preparation at all. Then the colonial administration handed out cholera vaccines. They were just discovered and quite helpful, but they did not help with the Spanish flu. They worked for the cholera. There was a lot of religious sentiment. It was interpreted as a punishment from God, so there was a lot of repentance and lots of religious movement that probably just helped spreading it because people would collect together in places. In Solo, for example, a lot of burning of incense, drinking of coconut juice, Sunan Lipen, I don't know if drinking coconut juice would help. Attacks on Chinese Indonesians, yes, this has a very long history in Indonesia, which seems to continue. And herbal remedies, the jabu, the clean, all kind of things, but they were not all that helpful. Ravando published a fantastic book around this, Lanjut, with Compass. Here are these advertisements for cures for the Spanish flu. Again, people made a lot of money out of it, but I doubt whether they were any effective. Lanjut. The colonial administration blamed the natives because they were unhygienic, primitive, superstitions. They didn't want to use Western medicine, even though Western medicine couldn't do anything. They appointed an influenza commission in 1920, too late, too little, and an influenza ordinance, quarantine. But once the disease is everywhere, quarantine doesn't really do anything. So one could maybe even argue that there are parallels with the reaction in Indonesia and many other countries today. Lanjut. Warning signs were there. The administration didn't really do anything. Lanjut. I had a slide with Ravando's book that came out last year with Compass, where he gives a really comprehensive, beautiful history. I don't know where the slide went. Sorry about that. I hope this is my last pandemic because you cannot keep on going with the pandemic. But the quarantine station in Batavia was ready in 1911 or 1912. And then in 1914, I think, the Black Death, the plague arrived. It spread through rats. That's okay. So the insect bite rats. Once there are no more rats to infect, they go to human beings. Sorry, Lanjut. Yeah. It came to the Indies in 1912 on a ship with rice from Rangoon. It landed in Surabaya. It spread quite quickly. Cipto Mangunkusumo, as one of the Indonesian doctors, volunteered to go there. This was a dangerous job. You were at risk, of course, of catching it and dying. Nonetheless, he said, it's my duty to do so. Where do the rats live? In bamboo. Bamboo, very popular in housing construction at the time. So the Dutch colonial administration said, okay, we have a program of housing improvement. We tear down houses and put other houses in there. Lanjut. Once you had the symptoms of the plague, you were placed in this kind of, well, prison area. This is a very good measure from a hygienic perspective. But of course, anyone who knows this would say, okay, if I have symptoms, I'm going to hide at home. I'm not going to reveal it because once I end up there, I will for sure die. So lots of people try to get out of this. And it looks, well, in the most awful way. And guess what? Indeed, it was Indonesians who ended up here, but white people were allowed to stay, Europeans were allowed to stay at home and get medical care from their doctors. Does that make sense medically? No, but it still was being done that way. Lanjut. Lots of sulfur treatment of houses. The idea was you need to kill all rats. And the colonial administration said, for every rat you get like a cent. And then little boys started to organize rat farms because they wanted to have as many rats as possible to get the reward. So this didn't quite work either. This for sulfur, you would just, sulfur smells like rotten eggs, like you can also smell it at volcanoes, and rats don't like it, so you rat him out. Next slide, Lanjut. Housing improvement, this means, yes, replacing basically the bamboo that was used in housing construction. Lanjut. And here you can see where the rats live. They would gnaw down the divisions between the compartments in the bamboo, and then it had a fantastic place for them to live. And this is why bamboo was banned from housing construction. Lanjut. So often the measures were arbitrary and discriminatory. The housing improvement in the end turned out to be effective, but it led to malaria. How does malaria spread? And I will just only briefly talk about malaria because I'm running out of time. Too many pandemics to discuss. You had lots of puddles, lots of mud, great places for the malaria larvae to grow. Isolation, it's the same reaction today to Ebola. Put all the patients, separate them, quarantine them to stop transmission, but people try to evade that, so it doesn't really have an effect. A vaccination became available in 1927. Once it was administered, the plague slowly started to disappear. Lanjut. I see I am running slightly out of time, so malaria. Malaria is the opposite of cholera, right? Cholera can kill you within a couple of hours. Malaria takes a very long time, and many people can have malaria the whole life. It saps them of energy. It is quite a serious problem. It is a problem in the developing world, and there is still no cure. There's not much research in it because there's not much money to be made for vaccinations or cures for diseases affecting the non-Western world because there's not so much money in it. Bill Gates funds research in malaria, and let's hope that this will have some success. Lanjut. It's all very difficult, but you need to have mosquitoes and larvae and insects. But basically, through this whole life cycle, it affects human beings, mostly the liver, and has its terrible effect. Once you have malaria, you can become contagious through mosquito bites, the first bite on you and then on someone else. Lanjut. Well, there were a whole bunch of colonial measures. Knowledge was very quickly found out that it was the mosquito, was the transmission agent. Mosquitoes breed in stagnant water, such as fish ponds or stagnant water everywhere. So there were attempts to close all the fish ponds or kill the larvae to prevent malaria. You have to do this every season. It's quite difficult work, but through environmental management, you can reduce the spread of mosquitoes. Where does malaria start? Well, often when there are large-scale changes, such as plantations, roads, and harbors. When there is a lot of activity, building activity, changing the environment, the natural environment, and you see malaria showing up. There was, well, not so much a cure as a symptom suppression, quinine or quina. And the Dutch East Indies, kind of by accident, became the world's largest supplier. This is a thing that grows in South America. Saplings were brought to India and elsewhere, but somehow in Indonesia it became a big success. And Kimia Pharma, or the Pasteur Institute, was central in making quinine to suppress these symptoms. That was the really only measure that could be taken at the time. Lanjut. in the 1950s, said, okay, we now know how to kill all the mosquitoes. We just use poison, DDT. In Indonesia, widely applied. So you see spraying the poison here. It turns out that this was really a bad idea because it ended up in the food chain and it would accumulate in human beings because they were at the end of the food chain and then had all kinds of terrible effects. So what seemed like a miracle cure turned out not to be much of a cure, but of a disaster. Lanjut. One measure that's quite effective is, of course, the mosquito net. And this is still the best measure available right now. There is still research going on, funded by philanthropy. Let's hope it does something. Lanjut. Conclusions. Well, pandemics, as I said, are unusually revealing because it upends the social order we are used to. It makes people fearful. It asks for a reaction. It indicates a state of knowledge in medicine and how it can develop. At times, medical measures were proposed that were entirely ineffective. Sometimes there were proposing measures that were effective, and not always they were implemented because governments are resistant and human beings are resistant. So it demonstrates what governments do. Either they do not like to intervene because it will damage the economy, or they're overly forceful, as some people say was the case in New Zealand. It shows the role of public health education, because now we all know how to wash our hands with with detergent. We know how to keep a distance. We know how to use a face mask. It shows public reactions, scapegoating, intolerance, hoaxes, fake cures, and anxiety. Lanjut. In Indonesia, during the COVID pandemic, hoaxes are everywhere, but this is not unique to Indonesia. It's everywhere. The craziest, the most interesting theories about pandemics and their causes are spreading worldwide. I would like to hear from the audience some reactions, like why would that be? Why do people adopt beliefs that really have no basis at all, that seem to be completely fanciful? So blaming and scapegoating is happening elsewhere. What varies between countries is who is being blamed. Fake cures, fake vaccines are also everywhere. But also we can see a comparative experiment with COVID here. Governments all over the world have reacted very differently. I think Indonesia and the United States have been characterized by slow government response so that COVID could spread quite widely. New Zealand and Australia have been characterized by very quick responses, so that COVID really nipped in the bud. Europe is yet another example of very ineffective interventions. In Indonesia, CBA government response to that was kind of inadequate, but you see a local initiatives, which is kind of interesting. Lanjut. This is one of the pieces in the conversation. I'm not quite 100% sure why reaction in Indonesia was so slow, except one reason is, if you put everything in lockdown, you destroy your own economy. And this probably was one reason why not much happened, because, well, yes, if you destroy the economy, then the damages are much worse. Lanjut. And I wish semoga sehat selalu to everybody in the audience. So talking about pandemics and disease is kind of dispiriting. So let's hope for the best. Let's hope that in Indonesia and worldwide, we manage to go beyond this pandemic and then think about how we can be prepared for the next one. The next one will come. We don't quite know when. Unfortunately, it will be there. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, people at the Universitas Negeri Semarang, for inviting me and inviting Brad. Nice to see you, Brad. Thank you very much. And I hope that my presentation is useful and inspiring in some way. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih, sehat selalu. Semoga untuk Prof. Hans Paul. That's really interesting for us. That's really give us an elaborated explanation on some epidemics that has been faced by Indonesian society specifically, and also the world as a whole. We really merinding in Bahasa Indonesia to see your description, to see how you elaborate the society's response, the government response, and also in some parts, there's also the colonial government response in solving the pandemic's matters. And also, it's very interesting. It is also closed with a very interesting conclusion, I guess, related to the COVID pandemic in Indonesia. You think that in Indonesia, there are so many hoax, although it has also happened in other parts of the world. There is so many hoax, and then blaming and scapegoating as usual from time to time. It is one of the recorded history in responding epidemics. And also there's also false or fake vaccine, fake cures. And you also have a note on government reactions. I guess Indonesian government, according to you, is between in two positions. We have to choose health or economy. That's very interesting, Professor Hans Paul. And I guess all the audience is very eager to give comment or question for you, and also for we have recorded some question for you and also for Dr. Harton. And now we have to start the question and answer seasons. We will have it for about an hour ahead, because we have to finish at 11:30, where we have to have a Friday prayer, because this is Friday. All right. Thank you very much again for you, Mr. Professor Hans Paul. Dear participants, now this is time for you all to participate in the discussion. You can raise your hand, or you can also write your questions on the chat box. While we are waiting for you to raise your hand, I would also make a record of the list of questions in the chat box. We're still waiting for anyone to join the question and answer season.
There's one question, if it's all right, I can address Professor Wasino's question to me.
All right. That's okay. While waiting for other participants to join the question and answer season, I would like to again give the question that has been written on the chat box. The first one is from Professor Wasino for Dr. Harton. You've got the question, but I would like to restate here. The question is, what about the digital archive from National Archive of Indonesia? Do you use it in pandemic time? That question is directed to Dr. Harton. Would you please
now? Yeah, thank you, Professor Wasino. It's a particularly interesting question because I really didn't expect the archive to have materials that would be accessible to me, and so I actually I'm going to have to do it. And the quick answer is no, but the reason is I was there last year with one of my co-researchers working on malaria during the occupation, and he's an Indonesian, so he was able to enter the archive, but I was only able to go as far as the desk because I didn't have research permission. I was only going to be in Indonesia for a very short period of time, and so it's rather difficult to process a research permission. So I was not able to access the materials. So my assumption was that during the pandemic, the same thing would be true, and that is that it would be, if there was something available, that it would probably be restricted. But I didn't actually check, and that's a mistake on my part. So I'm actually going to go check that later today, and so I'm very happy to get that hint that maybe something is different. But I'd also be very interested in how Indonesian researchers experience using the Arsip Nasional and their materials during the pandemic. They do have interesting materials depending on what you're working on, and really fascinating materials. And so if they're making those things available, that's fantastic. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mas Broto. I think it is a problem with Arsip Nasional until now about the digitalization of archive, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can get the archive from the web of Arsip Nasional.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for Prof. Fasino and Dr. Harden. Prof. Fasino also has a second question for Professor Hans Paul. The question is, why the Dutch ruler made different quarantine decision between European people and Indonesian people? Is it just based on racial reasoning or medical reasoning? Professor Hans Paul?
Yes, neither. So if the quarantine rule is you have to go in quarantine unless you pay a high fee and visit your doctor, it means that Europeans can afford that, but also wealthy Indonesians. But most Indonesians are not able to afford this. So in the rules, it doesn't say, this is the rules for Indonesians, this is the rule for Europeans. But in the way the rule is applied, very predictably, it disadvantages Indonesians. Also, if you come back from the Hajj, everybody needs to be in quarantine, whether they are European or Indonesian. In effect, this is pretty much all Indonesians who came back from the Hajj. So they were forced all to go in quarantine. So in the rules, it never says, these are the rules for Europeans and these are the rules for Indonesians. But the way the rules were applied and the way the rules were formulated put Indonesians at a disadvantage. And also, how they were applied. In principle, in the Malang area, anyone affected by the plague had to be interned. In practice, this only happened to Indonesians, not to Europeans. It was not in the rules, but anyone who knows how a colony works could understand why it is that way.
Thank you.
Okay, Prof. Fasino. You have finished with the question and there is no more feedback, Prof. Fasino?
Enough.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Now we will continue with the next participant. There is Pak Fadli Hussein from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. For Pak Fadli Hussein, now this is time for you to give your question to the speakers.
Okay, thank you, Bu Nino, as moderator. Do you hear my voice? Bu Nino?
Yes.
Is that clear?
Yes, is it clear enough?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This is a question for Professor Pauls. I'm sorry, I have to wear mask because I'm... WFO, work from office. So I have to take... Okay, Professor Pauls, according to your presentation, I just want to ask about is there any evidence or your research according to the cholera or pandemic in the Indonesian time in the past, concerning on the maybe the use of traditional medicine or plants or ethnobotanical medical ethnobotany plants or other ingredients in the time of pandemic in the past. It's in Java. Do you have evidence or something? Thank you.
That's a good question. I do not have the evidence. Brad has the evidence and he's digitized it, I know for sure. There we go. Of course, European medicine, Western medicine was introduced in the Dutch East Indies, but it was very expensive. So if you go to the pharmacy store, only wealthy Indonesians and Europeans were able to afford that, meaning that most Indonesians would use jamu. It's probably effective in some cases, not so effective in case of Spanish flu, for example. But we had there a very clear example of stratified medicine, as we still have today, right? Wealthy Indonesians go to Singapore for medical care. Then we have the private hospitals in Indonesia, public hospitals. Fortunately, the JKN has made medical care accessible to everybody. But still, quality of the care you receive depends very much on how much you're able to spend on it. But Brad, you said you have the evidence there, scanned and all. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's scanned, but let me briefly, with respect to malaria, I'm currently working on a paper related to the Japanese occupation. And actually, I can put a little bit, I just checked the memory stick that I have only has 10 files on it, but one of them is an early draft of this paper. So let me pop that on the screen. I'm starting my paper working on a book, Obat dari Bahan-bahan Negeri Sendiri. Yeah, so obviously you know that from 1945. And so they had a whole detailed plan for how to collect potential recipes, how to test them, how to disseminate them to the appropriate producers, whether individual people, companies, government offices, a whole range of different things. Very detailed plan that they worked out. And so I'm starting to work through some of the proposed medicines for malaria, and using Sembiloto, Lampes, Pegangan. That's one recipe. Pule and Ketepeng are two of the medicines in the second one. And that actually seems to be a better tested recipe that was tested in Sumatra in 1943, I believe, with relatively good results, about the same as Sinovac, somewhere around 50% effectiveness, which is, on a social level is very important. On an individual level, may not be quite enough. But with a mixture of that and quinine, he was able to cure everyone with a small, either no quinine or small doses. Of course, what he means by curing them is eliminating the symptoms for the time being. So, but in any case, he was able to do that. So, these are recipes that are coming out from Indonesian society, and then collected. We don't know for sure when, but he was using them in Sumatra in 1943, which is before this committee on Java got to work. But it's after the original Dutch period Indonesian committee was formed in 1941, and that Hans knows more about that than I do. But there's this gradual process of doctors getting involved with the local practitioners and then trying to find out what actually works. And at least by 1943, there's what I think we can call a scientific research study that then leads. That's in Sumatra, but it's reported in Borneo. It's reported in multiple newspapers in Java. Very long articles with details. It's very impressive. So this is something that was very important. I haven't looked at the other illnesses, but they're also for different pandemic type of illnesses. There are cures that are proposed, and I don't know if they're as good as malaria, but at least malaria did have some meaning.
Okay, thank you, Professor Broto. But I want to ask you about the you display one book actually before that, obat-obat dari negeri sendiri and others.
Yeah.
Do you find they consume a ginger or turmeric or something in the? But I saw a ketepeng, something like that. Is it in Sumatra or Java?
Well, this is published in Java.
Okay.
But the same research, Ketepeng, I believe, is. Let me make sure that I'm not. Oops, did I close that? Just a second. Oops. So just a second. Oh, that's a PDF. Okay. In the case of Ketepeng, yeah, it's Cassia alata is the scientific name, but it's also called Daun Galingan, and a few other similar names. So, but it was used in many different areas. And actually, it's been used for other things. In the post-war era, I don't see it mentioned as much for malaria as for other things. But it is something that's reputed to be very effective for different ailments. And yeah, I'm actually surprised that I haven't seen it listed for malaria other places, considering how effective it seemed to be in the testing in Sumatra.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Broto and Prof. Paul.
Okay. Okay, that's amazing for both presenters to have such a deep knowledge about Indonesian traditional remedy. It will be such of your competitor, Pak Fadli. It seems that they are your colleague, yeah, not competitor. Okay, thank you very much, Pak Fadli, for joining the question and answer season.
Thank you, Bu Nino.
Yeah. We still have another more question, Professor Hans Paul and Dr. Harton. We have a question from Pak Soheh. Pak Soheh is a lecturer from the Department of History, Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang. The question is dedicated to both of you. It's not a question, I guess. This is Pak Soheh want you to give your opinion in historical and sociological perspective. How has the creative response of various communities in Indonesia and also other countries around the world in facing of a pandemic? How is the creative response of communities in Indonesia and other countries in facing pandemic? Okay, these questions. Yeah. We will start from Dr. Harton.
Pak Hans.
Pak Hans dulu.
Yep.
Yes. Pak Hans, you go first.
One really creative measure, I forget where it was, somewhere in Java, people dressing up as ghosts at night. So people were too scared to go out because there were ghosts around. Now, I'm not sure how effective this is, but I thought it was truly creative. It is still a good question. Maybe you should also ask the audience for that. It, of course, was really hard for people just to stay home. But whatever we say about governments in Indonesia, you see on the very local level in small villages, the gotong royong, the helping each other out is still very strong. And I suspect there must be all kinds of examples of people helping each other out, making sure everybody has food, taking care of the kids, etc. Or maybe even forms. A friend of mine in Jakarta said to the kids in her neighborhood, the kids didn't have internet, poor neighborhood. She had internet, so she invited the 10 school kids in her immediate neighborhood to her home to do the online learning. And since she herself is a lecturer in the university, she was quite happy for the kids to be there and to support their learning. But these are just very little examples, but I think they're really inspiring. And yeah, I hope the audience can come up with more, because the ghosts made it to the newspaper, but the very simple things of helping each other out, of course, often don't.
Okay.
Okay,
And I'll just add a little bit because I don't have a lot to contribute. If anything, I'm more of a participant than an observer with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, vitally interested in ensuring that there are effective policies and also knowledge, behavior on the part of the public, and usually they're going the wrong direction. And the reasons why it's so vitally important for me is in Japan, the government has been afraid to take action to restrict movement and so forth. But what they do is they whisper into the ears of university presidents and company executives and say, prevent your employees from going anywhere. And so my employer, my university, created rules to prevent their students, faculty members from leaving the province. And the way that they did it was they said, after you come back, you must stay home for 2 weeks. But we're having face-to-face classes. So you have to teach face-to-face classes every day. But you're stuck at home for 2 weeks if you leave the province. So therefore you can never leave the province. And there are meetings when you're on vacation and entrance exams. And so there's just a constant stream of things that prevent you, if you follow the rules, from ever leaving the province. And it's a very creative effort on the part of the government to do something that I find rather despicable, because I don't believe employers should have the right to regulate your vacation time and your off hours behavior. The government, maybe yes, but your employer, but the government doesn't. So it's a very creative response in a way. But in terms of people's behavior, I'm just more worried about, will they do the things that are conducive to controlling COVID-19? Because if COVID-19 goes up, I can't move. If COVID-19 goes down, I can move again. I can see my family. I can do research. I can teach at other universities. And so I'm struggling rather than watching the creative juices flowing. And that Hans is much more lucky to have the patience. But I can tell you that the local Namahage monsters who go around in January to scare little children so that they become well behaved. They come into the houses and drink lots of sake. And this year they had a lot of problems. Only very few of them were able to do it, and they had to have masks on under and above their Namahage masks. So they're very concerned that this tradition could die out because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So a little bit of answer to his ghost stories. Unfortunately, the Namahage have not been successful at scaring away COVID-19. I'm hoping this next year they do it.
Yes.
Very, very good. Very funny. Pak Broto, could you tell me what is Namahage in Bahasa Indonesia?
The closest would be something like Genderuwo?
Oh, I see.
Something
yes.
like that.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find a picture of Namahage and I'll share it in a minute. So
Okay, thank you. Namahage. This is like Genderuwo in Java.
Namahage is now recognized by UNESCO as a what do they call it? A cultural heritage. No, it's not. It's a cultural heritage, or a non-physical cultural heritage, something like that.
All right. Yeah. I think we also find it in some Japanese cartoon, perhaps, the term Namahage.
Namahage, yeah, it's spread. It's used for a lot. It's very famous. It's very local, but very famous.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. While you find the picture of Namahage, I again invite the participants to give questions to the speakers. We still have more than 30 minutes here. Please, I invite you all to give your response, to give your question.
Any one of you would like to give questions?
I'm happy to ask a question and then answer it, but
Yes.
That's also good too.
yeah, that's very like a politician, right? Isn't there a question by Nurma Wulandari?
Yeah, there's one more questions in the chat box. Sorry,
You could also see someone with a raised hand in the audience.
Oh yeah. Yes, also there is a raised hand from Nurma Wulandari. Sorry, we will start from the person who raised hand first, and then we will continue with the question in the chat box. But Nurma Wulandari, now you can go.
Okay. Sorry, I can turn on my camera because I have some internet issues.
Yes.
First,
That's okay.
thank you for the opportunity. Let me introduce myself. My name is Nurma Wulandari. I'm from History Department of Universitas Negeri Semarang. I have some question to Mr. Broto, but I'm sorry because my question is not relevant to the topic we are talking about. From the literature that I have read, historical sources from Indonesia are scattered in various countries such as Malaysia, England, Japan, especially the largest in Netherlands. And of course, from these historical sources, a lot of historical information, spiritual science, political and social science, and urban planning are stored. From these historical sources, the identity of Indonesia nation could be more clearly. I know some sources about Indonesian history can be found in Perpustakaan Nasional, Arsip Nasional, and in this pandemic situation, it's easy to find on several digital sources such as KITLV, Delper, and National Archive. And what's your opinion? Why these countries want to keep even maintain this archive, even though the cost of maintenance is very expensive? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it's a good question, I think, and I think the answer probably differs from country to country and from archive to archive. Of course, the Netherlands, in the case of the Netherlands, Indonesia is an integral part of its history. It would not have become an important country in the 17th century without Indonesia. It would not have modernized in the way that it did in the 19th century without Java in particular. As recently as the 1990s, when I went to the Netherlands, I could feel that many Dutch people still did not accept that Indonesia should be separate from the Netherlands. And they were still very, very emotional about Japan having taken away their colony. I think it's changed a lot in the last 20 years. But in the 1990s, I could feel it very, very, very clearly. So it's a really important part for their history. In the case of the United States, for example, Cornell has a good collection and many other places do as well. They collect things because they are sincerely interested in studying different parts of the world. And in the case of Cornell, has a particular program on Indonesia. But those are born out of the research and teaching interests of individual faculty members And so that it kind of has its own history. It's kind of like my being interested in Indonesia. I had teachers who were Indonesianists, but I started by going to Indonesia as a high school student. And so it's part of my life, and so I continue to do it. So I think in each country it's something different. Malaysia, of course, is tied very closely to Indonesia, Singapore as well. So they should be very interested in what's happening in Indonesia. Australia, sadly, is throwing away its Indonesian language program, but they still have important connections, and so they should invest in the archives. So I think that those are reasons why the archives and the libraries are maintained. Hans, do you have more to add to that?
Well, we're coming to this really important ideas of Derrida. What is an archive? Why are archives maintained? For what kind of purposes? The Dutch bureaucracy in the Dutch East Indies kept a lot of files, and they ended up in the archives. Now we have a bit of an issue. There are interesting lawsuits right now of very old Indonesians who lost parents or siblings in the Dutch acts of military aggression. And often the Dutch defense is like, well, in our archives, there is no record of this. And of course, we can immediately say, well, why is there no record? Well, clearly, at the time, there was no interest in making a record. There actually was an interest in not making a record. So in that way, if you are able to compose an archive, you can create a past. And there was a question in the chat bubble, how do we guarantee the authenticity of the documents that are available online? But that is a really good question that I hadn't really thought about. We can see, for example, how China, Russia, Myanmar would want to create an online archive going back a very long time that supports the current claims of the regime. And with a little bit of Photoshop, you can alter records, you can make some records disappear, you can make kind of others. So that, I think, is a potentially very dangerous activity. And Brad, what do you think? What can we do about that? We suspect that people at Cornell, we can trust them because they have a scholarly interest, they put things online. Yes, but that's not always the case.
This is an issue that that actually my collaborator and significant other has worked on with respect to comfort women for decades, because everyone since at least 1992 has had political interests above historical interests. And the result is the selection of documents that are used, the lack of serious research, and the willingness to doctor anything if a little bit if they can make it work for what they want. There's many different ways in which you can say whatever you want to say, and unfortunately that's been the case for the study of comfort women. But in any case, one of the keys is to be able to tie a document to as far back as you can. The histories, each document, like the books, have their own histories. And if you can trace the histories back and if you can understand it, then a serious researcher can identify very often whether something is real or what it means, and also what it means for there not to be things, how you can prove something that's not in if there's no archive that would identify a particular person as having been killed. Is there another archive that would serve a different purpose that might have the same information? But it's a tremendous task, and that's why I said that the depth of people going and sitting in the archives and not just using a database to search, but to actually go through piles of documents, to find one little half piece of paper, because you see hundreds of pieces of paper that are about something else, and you gradually learn where there might be something that could be interesting for this other question. And you learn more about why they were creating it, why they kept it, and then you can try to guess things. Now, could any of these documents, if you take a photocopy of any of them, could you take them out and Photoshop them and put them on the internet with something else? And you can always do that. And so there's always going to be a risk particularly if you start having newer or also smaller archives, you know, the things that, for example, my group collects, well, we're a small group. Then you have to evaluate how much you trust our methodology in collecting things and our honesty with presenting it. Because we could be cheated. We're not going to cheat someone, but we could be cheated by someone and get fake documents and present them. And if you can slip them into an archive, then you really can change the nature of history. And, you know, we know that during the post-war period that well, at 1945, Japan destroyed lots of documents. Of course, every country does when they're losing a war. U.S. orders all of its embassies to burn things whenever they're closing down. It's normal. So a lot of things do disappear. But we also know that Indonesian ministries were throwing documents out in the street in the late 1960s and getting rid of things. I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands was cleaning up their files before they turned them over to the National Archives, because they didn't trust the National Archives to prevent people from reading it. They didn't want people to read the material. They wanted to keep it, but they didn't want people to read it. And so when they couldn't keep people from reading it, then they destroyed it. So there's a lot of that goes around. But yeah, it's a difficult problem, and it's something that everyone has to try to be aware of. And that's the best we can do. It's really tricky when we get onto the internet. There's so many things that they look real, they sound real, and especially if you don't have training. And even if you have training, if someone puts up something about Australian history, I can be suspicious, but I don't have the detailed factual knowledge to be sure. And that I only can be suspicious because I know what happens in other countries. I can feel it, but I can't prove it. And if you can't prove it, then it means nothing.
Right.
So let me quickly share something here. This is actually me as a namahage. There were these masks in a small, well, relatively major small bullet train station inside of Akita. And one day I just went out from Akita City and took a train somewhere, and then went into the train station for an hour and played around, and they had this. So I took a selfie. So this is what a namahage looks like. They're red or they're blue. And you can see this would really scare little kids, but I don't know how well it works for COVID-19.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, that's the namahage. Okay, Mbak Nurma, do you still have any questions related to your previous question? Mbak Nurma?
Thank you, Mr. Hans Paul and Mr. Broto. I think that is clear.
Okay, that's crystal clear for Nurma Wulandari. It seems that part of the question in the chat box has been discussed by Professor Hans Paul, but it is not a bad thing if I again restate the next question from the chat box. It is from Pak Satya from the Department of Geography, Faculty of Social Science, Universitas Negeri Semarang. The question is dedicated to Dr. Horton. How can we ensure the validity of online data source, besides ensuring that the data is the official website? Ms. Satya, want you to again underline how to ensure the validity of data.
My only answer is, I hope everyone becomes historians.
Yeah, that's the solution. That will also be the end of COVID.
Right. It's very good to understand what happened and to get a sense of it, but also to understand how you think through the problems, how you think through what it could be. And when it's suspicious, it doesn't mean you reject it, but you keep it far, far away. And that doesn't guarantee, you can't say, yes, this is valid, no, this is not valid. Sometimes there's gray areas. There are always gray areas in between yes and no. And you have to know that and know when you have yes, when you have no, and when you have maybe. That's, historians are trained, but I think many other scholars are as well. But I know if everyone became historians, we'd be safe.
All right. That's an interesting answer. To ensure the validity of data, all of you should be historians. So we prefer historian, sociologists, and many other professions. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Now we still have time. We still have around 20 minutes again to finish the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I invite you to raise your hand if you want to say something, if you want to confirm something, or if you want to ask something to the speakers. We're still waiting. Any one of you?
Well, shall I throw in another topic?
Yeah.
Shall I bring up another topic?
So we have
Go ahead, Hans, while we're waiting.
Yeah.
Yes.
We see so many interesting things developing around vaccines. Europe is banning the export of vaccines. They want to keep it all to themselves. The United States actually has effectively banned export of vaccines, and they are. We have a Russian vaccine that turns out to be quite effective. It's just like, what? How are they able to do that? But that goes to countries like India. Then the Sinovac, we get the vaccine diplomacy. Lots of smaller countries in the region say, oh, you can have lots of Sinovac vaccine, but, we want to buy your harbor, you want to make some roads, or we want you not to object to our international policies. So we see the politics around vaccines are getting quite complicated. One of the more interesting things is that India said, look, intellectual property rights, suspend them, and we can, within a year, can make enough vaccines for the whole world population 3 times over. And then the West said, no, can't do that, which means that it will take a lot longer, but it will respect the profit motive of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I think that's a terrible choice. And there are provisions internationally. In the case of an emergency, you can suspend this. It should have been the right thing to do, but it's not. So here we see there's all kind of difficulties in responding internationally to health problems and epidemics, and that just ordinary politics is getting in the way. What is Indonesia using? Sinovac mostly, or?
Mostly, I'm not sure about this, but the most popular one, I guess, is Sinovac.
And is China put any special conditions on this?
I personally do not have much information about that one, about vaccine and etc.
No.
Yeah, it seems that
the participants will not use their chance to give questions anymore, but we still have time over here. Please let me give you one more question for both of you. Sorry, I have an. This is very interesting for me. Could you give your opinion about the most opportunist people in the epidemic? Can you give what is the most opportunist form? Do you think in this epidemic era?
Well, first of all, the pharmaceutical industries, right? They received billions of dollars of government support to develop a vaccine, and now they have one and they sell it. And I would think if you receive so much funding, maybe you should make the vaccine available for free, or at least you should, the governments that supported you, build them for less. So that's one thing, yeah.
I think I agree with you, Hans, but I think that you have to put in big letters United States pharmaceuticals, and then in small letters European pharmaceuticals,
Yep.
and then everyone else you can leave out.
Yep. No, correct. Quite good suggestion.
Other people who are particularly, I mean, they are certainly number one in terms of the opportunists. However, I think that we found that a lot of major companies actually, well, the billionaires in the United States, whatever business they are in, continued to get richer.
Yes.
During the COVID-19 crisis, even though the economy was collapsing, people are going out of work, but yet the billionaires could become much, much richer in every industry. And the reason is because they don't make money from selling goods. They make money by government support and by playing games with the stock market. And they were very good at doing it. And so they have been very opportunistic, and the result is that the gap between the rich and the poor, especially in the United States, but probably in other countries as well, has increased a lot, and that will have a great social impact in the future, great negative social impact in the future.
But this is a concern, I think, over the past 40 years. Inequality has been rising everywhere. The United States and Brazil are quite extreme, but Indonesia is the fourth most unequal country in the world. There's enormous wealth concentrated in the top. Like the top 10 richest families own, 60-70% of the wealth in Indonesia. And as we all know, concentration of wealth erodes democracy, because these wealthy families are able to get rules implemented that benefit them. And this leads to an erosion of confidence in governments, but also a loss of social morale, the whole sense of we are in it together. Well, clearly not. Some people are not. And this is one of the biggest problems to address once this whole pandemic is over. Because when times are going great, the wealth get wealthy. The wealthier get wealthier, and when times are going awful, the wealthiest get wealthier. So they have a way indeed of adapting. And yes, it is great to see the average income in Indonesia rising, but it doesn't rise for the bottom 50%. Now we add, yes, okay, now we have addressed or started to address a very, very big problem in our modern world that leads us a bit away from our original topics, but nonetheless, yes, it's quite important. And I think this international inequality is again demonstrated in access to vaccines. The countries who can control exports of vaccines or can just pay more for vaccines so they can monopolize the supply, they will be back on their feet much more quickly. Well, that means countries in Africa will be the very last ones. South America, many countries in Asia. So yes, this inequality also on the international level really makes chances for recovery very different.
Let me connect up what you're saying now, Hans, to the theme of the conference in terms of the digital humanities and education. That the gaps between the wealthy and the poor, even the middle class and the poor in this case, if there is still a middle class, so a much wider, not just the 0.1%, but also a little bit wider elite class, they continue with good education, even if it's through internet sources. But the lower social classes, whether that's 10% or 50% or 80% in different countries, have their education completely destroyed by this. They're not able to participate in the digitalization of the world. They're left out of that because they don't have the technology, they don't have the time, they don't have the money. If they had a computer, they'd sell it to be able to eat. It's a different world for the poorer people than it is for the wealthy, and with increasing gaps between the rich and the poor, more and more people become poor. And so it's a very difficult situation, and it does very much affect the theme of this I think that of this conference.
I think, as you already highlighted in your presentation, putting source material on the internet potentially democratizes access, because they're then available for everybody. But nonetheless, we have paywalls, we have systems that make material accessible for people associated with the wealthier universities and not. Nonetheless, the internet, online learning, the online availability of sources has a very strong potential to democratize and to provide equal access. And that was the dream of the people who started this whole internet. And I think let's try to think of ways to realize that dream. Now, the Perpustakaan Nationaal might say, well, yes, that is all good and well, but we have to invest mightily to digitize all these kind of things. Very true. So we need to think about methods of making material available for free.
Well, the other thing is automatically, if it's digitized, the wealthy will get it. But if you don't have a computer, and if you don't have Pulsa for your phone, then you will not access.
No, absolutely true.
Yes, I think internet access is most important now.
Well, as they say that, our smartphone, the computer in it or the chip in it is smarter than all the computing that was used in the first landing on the moon. Now, what do? Now we have so much available information, is we look at pictures of cats and we yell at each other on the internet, on social media for being stupid. So some people say that lack of access of information was the problem. We have more information available than ever before, and the world is not yet getting better. So we need more than information.
All right. Thank you very much for the very nice discussion. And also, I agree with Dr. Harten. Although digitalization has many negative effects like decontextualization and etc., but this is the reality that we have to face now. And we also hope from this conference, I'm sure that all the participants can get their own conclusion, they can get their own new insights after hearing from you all both. I guess it will be such a great inspiration for them to again go on continuing doing research using digital sources and also real sources which can be do after we finish this pandemic era. And also one suggestion from Professor Hans Paul that
in dealing with everything, in dealing with the accuracy or validity of a data, you should have a strong sense of a historian. We hope that from what you have delivered here in this conference, we are as Indonesian academician and also from students or scholars or researchers, there will be much more research on social life, not only during this pandemic era, but also after this has been faced by all of us. Again, thank you very much for joining in this conference. And I would like to give information from the committee that we will have a photo session before we finish this discussion, and I give the microphone back to the master of ceremony. We will have a photo session. So I will invite all the participants to turn the camera on, the web on. Bapak Ibu, you are pleased to activate your camera because we will have a photo session with the speakers. We'll wait. Some of you still in the off mode. Kita tunggu dulu sebentar, masih banyak yang masih on, masih off.
Thank you very much, Prof. Hans and Mas Broto, for your coming in internet conference. And maybe next time we will invite you to reality conference.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Masino.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, it seems that some of you have activated the camera. Bapak Ibu Panitia sudah siap ya? Ini nampaknya yang paling banyak sudah ini. Beberapa sudah membuka. Bisa? Can we make the picture now?
Kurniawan.
Ready.
Sudah ready atau belum?
Ready. Sudah. Already?
Mas Edi, boleh dihitung?
Halo Puji. Halo Shafia.
Thank you. Oke.
Nampaknya sudah ya, Bapak Ibu Panitia belum.
Panitianya di mana itu?
Sudah diambil gambarnya sudah.
Sudah diambil gambarnya. Okay. Yeah, baik. Again, thank you very much for Professor Hans Paul and also Brett Harton, PhD, for the very nice discussion. Thank you very much. Let's see you again next time. Semoga semuanya sehat-sehat, Pak Broto dan Pak Paul.
Thank you very much, Nino.
Okay, thank you very much, dear all participants. I'll give back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Nino Solihah Akiro SSM Hum as a moderator. It's amazing speaks material from our speakers today. Once again, thank you for Mr. William Bradley Harton, PhD, and Mr. Professor Hans Puls. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's enough for us. Yeah, I would like to apologize for my mistake. And now, we place you to having break. Okay, and after break, we will continue to the next session.
Before that, I will give I will give some announcement about next session. I will explain with bahasa ya. Okay, so peserta ya nantinya akan dipersilahkan masuk ke room kembali itu pukul 12.30 ya Bapak Ibu sekalian, dan nantinya panel akan dimulai pukul 13 siang. Jadi pukul 1 nanti akan dimulai, tetapi untuk roomnya dan juga peserta diperbolehkan masuk di pukul 12:30 seperti itu. Nah, nantinya breakout roomnya sendiri ini sudah ditandai ya dengan nama moderator di masing-masing room. Ini nanti akan saya bacakan. Ini untuk room pertama, moderatornya yaitu Bapak Sabit Azinar Ahmad SPD MPD. Lalu untuk room yang kedua, ini dimoderatori oleh Ibu Aprilia Vindayani SPDM Icess ya. Mohon maaf apabila ada salah pengucapan. Untuk room ketiga nanti akan dimoderatori oleh Dr. Atika Wijaya MSI, dan untuk room keempat nantinya akan dimoderatori oleh Dr. Gunawan M.Hum, dan di room kelima akan dimoderatori oleh Ibu Fitri Amalia Sintasiwi MA ya. Begitu ya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Jadi setelah ini ada break dulu. Jadi bisa istirahat, sholat, makan. Setelah itu nanti dilanjut akan memasuki panel kembali di pukul 12.30 dan nantinya akan dimulai di pukul 13.00. Sedikit ada tambahan kembali Bapak Ibu sekalian ya. Nantinya ketika masuk ke room kembali dimohon untuk para peserta untuk mengganti nama ya. Nama di Zoom-nya ini dengan format nama moderator _ nama diri. Mungkin saya akan memberikan sedikit contoh ya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Seperti ini, misalnya moderator Sabit ya, mohon maaf. Sabit, nama diri Berlian. Kurang lebih seperti itu, Bapak para peserta ya. Mohon untuk diperhatikan. Jadi nanti ketika untuk memasuki room kembali dipastikan untuk mengganti nama Zoom-nya seperti itu tadi ya, moderator Sabit misalnya, atau moderator Aprilia, atau moderator Atika, hanya cukup namanya saja, atau mungkin moderator Gunawan, atau moderator Fitri _ nama diri dari masing-masing peserta. Seperti itu. Dan link yang digunakan adalah link yang sama saat ini seperti apa yang sedang digunakan oleh para peserta pada acara conference hari ini. Begitu ya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Terima kasih. Terima kasih atas antusias dari para peserta dalam acara 6th International Conference on Education and Social Science or Icess. Dan kita bertemu lagi besok Bapak Ibu sekalian. Dan silakan untuk bisa beristirahat di siang hari ini. Terima kasih. Mohon maaf apabila ada salah kata. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi